Hi, this is Ted. I'm going to be talking to you today about, let's see, what am I going to be talking to you about here? I'm going to talk about Paula White because Paula White is back in the White House. All right, this means that a lot of her swindler friends who take advantage of the poor, they do take advantage of the poor, and they take advantage of the sick, will be invited in to visit with and pray for President Trump, getting photo apps with him. When I was just a kid, all right, when I was just a kid, Billy Graham listened to a bunch of reporters and they asked him to kneel down in front of the White House after having visited President Eisenhower. Well, President Eisenhower was kind of ticked off about Billy Graham because he felt like he was just taking opportunity and was not really a genuine Christian. Well, that doesn't bother things nowadays. I mean, these preachers that are being brought in, they just love to take their photo apps with the president. No problem at all. Well, Graham actually did regret what happened. He was kind of lured into it because he left the White House, having talked to Eisenhower, and the people, the reporters, oh, kneel down with your Bible, hold out your Bible. And he did, and he regretted it ever since then. Well, he was also invited by every president after that until he died. He later visited all the presidents, and he did not make the same mistake. He learned from his mistake. Rightly so. And it's one thing I really, really admire him for. He didn't always do the right thing, but we'll see some of the reasons why not. But he did make mistakes, but he always tended to, well, when he got busted anyway, when he got caught, he would fess up and he would ask forgiveness or whatever. I mean, he did the right things. Well, these prosperity preachers being brought in by Paula White, they have no shame. They will continue to get their photo ops every time they can. They lust after human power. And that's what it is in the White House. This is human power. Don't forget that. We serve the gospel. We don't serve human power. Anyway, Billy Graham later went on to become a huge supporter of President Nixon, who was a Quaker by faith. Nixon and Graham loved each other, and they talked to each other, confiding with each other on all kinds of stuff, like saying that the Jews were a big problem for the United States. Ooh, that one hurt. White House tapes got out, exposing Nixon and Graham's discussions, and Graham rightly apologized to Jewish organizations. He also learned another lesson during those days, because until those tapes came out, he really believed Nixon was a godly Quaker. I think he wanted to believe it. And when we want to believe something strong enough, it seems to blind us to things we should be seeing. But the tapes recorded many other conversations where Nixon swore like a truck driver, using the F-bomb everywhere he could. And Billy Graham was disappointed. He realized that he had made a mistake with the president. I sometimes wonder if he was in agreement with preacher William Riley in the early days, in his early ministry. Not so sure. William Riley was a good friend of his and helped him get into different types of ministries. And William Riley was openly preaching that Hitler was a man of God. Well, he was called by God. He was called by God to get rid of communism. Riley loved Hitler until the United States declared war on Germany. Then he just shut up. Why did he love him so much? Because he was anti-communist. Everybody was anti-communist back then. And Hitler was doing a great job of getting rid of communism over there in Europe. And that's what happens when we get so focused on one thing, we neglect to see some of the other things that are going on. And that's what happened with William Riley. Well, no one could foresee anyway back then what Hitler would become. Nevertheless, before the United States got involved in that war, he was starting to take over different countries. He basically claimed Poland had tried getting into and taking over Germany, which was basically just a ruse. It was a made-up story so that he could come in and take over Poland. And that was the first of several countries that were taken over by Hitler. Anyway, but the United States, we didn't really have that much concern what was going on in Germany, at least not until Pearl Harbor got us into the war. We did help out England a bit, but it was just kind of on the side. Well, after his ordeal with Nixon, Graham slowly abandoned politics. I don't think he ever left it entirely. He would say he regretted getting into politics, but I'm not sure he ever did. I mean, I think he still had his foot in there some way or another. I don't know. Anyway, a few evangelical leaders at the time struggled with the gospel, but this back in the 70s and 80s. You had evangelical leaders struggling with, should we get into politics? I mean, even Pat Robertson told his people that he should not get into politics. He'd be backsliding to do so. Backsliding into politics. He should stay true to the gospel, but eventually he backslid entirely and ran for the president of the United States. He actually did pretty well in Iowa. He scared his opponent, George Bush Sr., into doing some weird restructuring Michigan districts, but that's another story. Well, in his last years, Billy Graham shared two regrets over his life. First of all, he regretted not being with his family more. I think of that often. Secondly, and not just him, I've seen others who are very good with some ministry, but you see their families falling apart, and that's kind of sad. And I have no response what to say. The second regret he had was getting into politics. Even still, he seemed to have leaning towards getting into politics against his better judgment. Well, at least that's the only way that I can make sense of what he said and what he did. Anyway, before I move on from Billy Graham, I don't approve of everything that he did. I do like a lot of what he did. You know, I have a lot of respect for his ability to preach the gospel and admitting that he was not perfect, admitting from time to time that he had done the wrong thing. Now, you may think that was all just to cover up and he was really good. Well, even so, it's a good example. None of us are perfect. We all make stupid mistakes. And I think especially when you have that much power thrown at you, you're going to make mistakes. And he did. But the biggest one for him was just getting involved at all with politics. His wife used to kick him under the table when he was eating with President Nixon and his wife, and all of a sudden conversation would turn to politics. His wife would basically constantly say, get out of politics, stay out of it. Now back to the present. These sleazy prosperity gospel preachers who take advantage of the poor. How do they take advantage of the poor? You give me your money and God will bless you. Who's going to be the first to give the money? Because that's the ones who need it the most. But they don't care. As long as their ministry, which gives them a huge salary and jets and cars and all kinds of stuff, as long as their ministry is prospering, they don't care about these people. Oh, they say they do. They might have a heart for it, but they're not going to do squat for these people, except tell them to give more. This is sleazy. And also they take advantage of people who are desperate for health. You know, have you noticed, do you have a friend, anybody that's dying, cancer, and what do? They start looking out and reaching out for anything. They'll get to medicines that have nothing to do with science. They'll get into all kinds of weird different things. Why? They'll go to faith healers, or they ordinarily wouldn't, because they're desperate. They want so much to live. And it's those people faith healers take advantage of. And they don't care. Maybe some of them really buy the garbage they hand out. Really, oh yeah, you would really prosper. Look at how much I prospered because I gave to some preacher back in the year. It's still sleazy. And they're not looking at it carefully enough. They're too caught up in their own egos. They're too caught up in their own sleaze to be able to get out. And many of them, I think, really know they're doing wrong, thought they're doing right at first. Now they know they're doing wrong, but they're too steeped in it and don't know what to do. So they just keep on doing the same thing. Benny Hinn was a mess. He kind of went back and forth with that whole thing. That's another story. I don't want to get into that. Now, I have deep empathy for the people so hungry for a healthy life that they would go anywhere to find a solution. I get it. It burdens me. I have a friend who came down with cancer. He turned all kinds of alternative medicines, but healing never came. He died when he was 36 years old. Another friend, very close to me, from my early years as a charismatic Christian, he died in his 50s. And I'm convinced the reason was because I no longer kept really close contact with him. I just heard from somebody that had talked to him, who was a good friend of his, in his 50s, that he had died. He didn't tell me how. But I do know this. I talked to Ray, his name was Ray, just a few years before he died. And he said to me, he was crushed. Why? Because he had diabetes and it was a pretty serious case. And his church was rebuking him for taking medicines and for even being sick. See, this is the kind of sleazy stuff these preachers are giving to their people. And their people are becoming puppets, passing on this trash, horrible stuff. But his church rebuked him for having diabetes, and I'm convinced that my close friends stopped his life-saving medication in order to live by faith. His faith, the type of faith they wanted in him, was stronger than any of theirs, because I guarantee some of them were on who knows what kind of medicine, pretending they're not, covering it up, letting everybody know they live by faith, or at least letting everybody believe they live by faith. Well, because he went the distance and never turned back, he, like many others, died. And of course, the law's not going to do anything. It's his choice. But he was brainwashed by these sleazy people. Even after rebuking his so-called lack of faith, many of them took medicines for their headaches and their colds, and who knows what else. So this is what we're going to see in the White House for the next 4 years, a prosperity preacher who has ruined 3 churches, been through 2 divorces. For some reason, I think it might be 3. I don't know, but she went at least 2 divorces. She stole from offering plates and one, it was accusation, okay? Stole from offering plates at one church. And she told us that God has anointed her. And she tells us that God is anointed and believes it. Well, at least Billy Graham could admit when he did wrong and was exposed. You won't see that with the kind of sleazy people brought in with Paula White. Hey, subscribe to me.